Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Administrator Pruitt, it's hard to know where to begin this morning. Every day there seems to be a new scandal and you at dead center. It's clear that I've had policy disagreements with you from the beginning and that I opposed your nomination. So it should come as no surprise when I called on you to resign. What is surprising, however, is the breadth of voices who agree with me that your leadership at the EPA is disastrous. I think it is extraordinary that so many previous administrators of the EPA, including Republicans, have lambasted your leadership. The very first EPA administrator, a Republican appointed by President Nixon and reappointed by President Reagan, described your actions as the EPA, and I quote here, taking a meat axe to the protections of public health and the environment, end quote. He went on to say that you and your top staff, quote, don't fundamentally agree with the mission of the agency, end quote. Another Republican former EPA administrator, Christine Todd Whitman, said, and I quote here, Scott Pruitt is unfit to run the EPA because he lacks ethical integrity, a quality that is of the utmost importance when entrusted with protecting the environment and public health, end quote. There is nothing I can say here today that would come close to having such esteemed former officials chastise you publicly like that. But I will do my best because it needs to be said that your tenure at the EPA is a betrayal of the American people. You have used your office to enrich yourself at the expense of the American taxpayer and public health, and such abuses have led to several investigations. The EPA Inspector General is investigating your luxury travel, your trips back to Oklahoma for football games, your cut-rate condo rental from a lobbyist, your extensive use of clean drinking water programs to promote your political advisors, and how one of your closest advisors was paid despite not showing up for work for 3 months. The government's nonpartisan watchdog, the Government Accountability Office, or the GAO, is investigating your questionable policies to stack EPA's science advisory committees with industry, as well as a lobbying video you starred in urging political action. Even your own White House is reviewing your sweetheart condo deal and your spending on your soundproof privacy booth. I can only wonder if more investigations will start based on your fast-tracking a new Superfund site at the behest of a conservative media personality and other reports that EPA has taken quick actions to help political donors and lobbyists. One investigation has already been completed, one I personally requested. The GAO found that you broke the law by hiding taxpayer spending on the privacy booth. I have a lot of questions for you today on this topic because 1 month later, you haven't followed the law by reporting to Congress or the President, your boss, how you let this happen and how you plan to fix it. And now you haven't submitted to this committee the statutorily required reports on all your other office spending as we sit here today trying to get to the bottom of your reckless spending. I'm announcing this morning that I just requested a new GAO investigation, this one to determine if EPA violated the appropriations law banning taxpayer spending on publicity and propaganda by engaging in political speech via social media. The Office of Special Counsel is also examining whether EPA's April 13th tweet violated the Hatch Act, which governs the ethics of political speech by public employees. These two investigations into EPA's single tweet encapsulate a running theme: your disregard for ethics and your disregard for taxpayer dollars. Administrator Pruitt, I'm tempted to say your scandals are a mere sideshow distracting us from the long-lasting devastation your leadership is making on human health and the environment. Indeed, while your scandals splash from front pages and clog up digital media, you've been hard at work dismantling scores of important protections. You've taken steps to roll back clean air and clean water protections, walked away from our historic global commitment to reduce the impacts of climate change. You've even managed to distort and unravel toxics reform, which was recently enacted on a bipartisan basis. Several of your attempts to halt progress on these and other public health efforts have been rejected by the courts for violating basic legal requirements for altering existing standards, requirements that you should be familiar with after decades of losing lawsuits against the EPA before you took its helm. But ultimately, Administrator Pruitt, I just can't separate your scandals from these shameless efforts to dismantle EPA. They are one and the same. Both your scandals and your policy decisions abuse your position of public trust and make a mockery of your responsibilities as head of EPA. You show the same disregard for our ethical standards and fiscal controls as you show for the air we breathe and the water we drink. Using your office to enrich yourself and your friends at the expense of the American taxpayer and the public health is a disgrace. The fiscal year 2019 budget proposal is yet another giant blinking sign that you don't take your responsibility to this country seriously. The budget proposes to slash EPA's research programs in half, gutting the ability of the agency to identify threats to public health and the environment, as well as solutions to those threats. The request also cuts nearly 50% of funds sent directly to the states. For example, the budget proposes to eliminate state funding for radon poisoning prevention, childhood lead poisoning prevention, hazardous waste disposal, and even drinking water monitoring. This isn't cooperative federalism, it's flat-out abandonment. The request proposes to cut off our multi-year effort to support independent monitoring of the contaminated water still flowing from the Gold King mine into areas of New Mexico and the Navajo Nation. The $4 million program is barely more than your reported spending on your security detail. And your promises in this very room a year ago to make sure the Navajo and others harmed by the Gold King mine spill are properly compensated have fallen completely flat. Not one payment has been made. The budget also proposes to give polluters a pass by cutting criminal and civil enforcement by a quarter. The budget backs off entirely from virtually all climate programs, including voluntary coordination, international partnerships, and basic monitoring. I'm not surprised to see that you even propose to cut EPA's Inspector General by 10%. I suppose slowing down their work might sound appealing. Administrator Pruitt, the budget request before us today is dead on arrival because it would pull out the rug from underneath every single state in our country and decimate critical public health and environmental programs. This budget request is also dead on arrival because it is completely tone deaf to reality. This bipartisan Congress has maintained steady funding for EPA for the last 2 years running and even boosted water infrastructure investments and lead reduction programs, despite the administration's draconian proposals to shrink the agency into oblivion. So I'm not worried about this. I'm not worried that this Congress will accept drastic cuts to EPA's operating budget or that we are going to cut off support that we send to the states. What I am worried about, Administrator Pruitt, is that you have been treating your position of public trust as a golden ticket for extravagant travel and fine dining, and as a platform to cozy up to media personalities, political donors, and polluters. I'm worried you are spending all your time enriching yourself and your friends while betraying your mission to protect human health and the environment. I look forward to our discussion today. Glad to see that Senator Leahy has joined us, the ranking member on our Appropriations Committee, and thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Administrator Pruitt, there's been a deluge of reports about ethical and spending problems in your office. I'd like to give you an opportunity to go on the record confirming or denying some of these reports. In the limited time we have, the public deserves real answers. Do you know how many investigations into your ethics and spending are ongoing as of today?
Well, there are inquiries by the Inspector General, as you know, Ranking Member Udall, and there's interaction with the GAO as well. So as far as the total number, I don't know, but I know that those agencies and those individuals or offices are involved.
By my count, there are 14, including the inquiry I requested today, and I'm confident the GAO will accept. And it's 16 if you include the 2 ongoing reviews by your bosses at the White House and the OMB. And Madam Chair, I'd ask consent to submit that list for the record.
Those will be included.
Administrator Pruitt, as a former Attorney General, and you know, you and I share that responsibility. We didn't serve at the same time, but and you're also a law enforcement official at the EPA. Do you support Special Counsel Mueller completing his investigation?
I'm sorry, Ranking Member Udall, investigation into...
Do you support Special Counsel Mueller completing his investigation?
I'm not, I think the process is continuing.
It's
That's
a
not
simple
something,
yes
that's
or
not something I'm
no.
aware
I don't know.
of.
Yeah. Do you support him completing his investigation?
I don't
You're
know
a
where
law
he's in the
enforcement
process.
official. You've had investigations before. Do you support it?
I think as Attorney General, it's important for law enforcement, those investigators that serve prosecutors, to be able to provide adequate information to them to make informed decisions about whether to proceed as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
I did that as
So-
Attorney General, and I would
so
trust that
the-
would happen at the federal level as well.
As you know, the right answer is yes. Whenever there's an investigation ongoing, a president or Rudolph Giuliani or anybody else shouldn't be interfering with that investigation, putting time limits on it or anything else. And that's the reality.
I also-
Yesterday, I haven't asked a question, sir. Yesterday, I requested a GAO inquiry into the April 13th tweet from your EPA's official account, which you mocked Democratic senators for their votes opposing the confirmation of an EPA official. Are you aware appropriations law prohibits federal spending on publicity and propaganda?
Well, I was unaware of the tweet, and that shouldn't have occurred.
You were unaware of it, so
I was
you
unaware of
didn't
the tweet, and that shouldn't have
authorize it.
occurred. There should have been no mocking that
You
took place.
apologize for it?
The agency should not have done that.
Okay, and you apologize for it.
The agency should not have done that.
What, do you apologize to the Democratic senators that you were mocking?
The agency should not have engaged in that process.
And you agree, I guess, that, well, let me go on to the privacy booth. Today marks 1 month since GAO announced that the EPA violated the Anti-Deficiency Act by hiding a $43,000 expenditure on a privacy booth. The law requires agencies to immediately report to the President and Congress on how the violation happened and what you plan to do to fix it. But we have no report in hand. When do you plan to comply with the law by properly reporting this violation, including what EPA plans to do to make sure it doesn't happen again, and your boss, the President, and the Congress?
As I mentioned to the chairman in the comments I just provided, one of the things that I've learned with respect to this particular process is there were not proper controls in place. And when I say proper controls, there was no legal review that took place contemporaneous to approving the contract on whether notification should occur to Congress or whether it fell within the $5,000 threshold.
But you're-
That was
sir,
that was not.
You're required now to report it. You were
That is
required then. We do not have that report.
That's not my
As
understanding.
far as I know, the President doesn't have that report. Are you going to report to us?
It's my understanding that Congress has been, in fact, informed about the $43,000 expenditure.
No, you have not issued the report that is required, and tell us how you're going to fix this. So
Well, there's
will
an
you
ongoing
commit
investigation.
today to do that?
There's an ongoing investigation
Will you
internally.
commit today
and
to do that?
to do what, Ranking Member Udall?
Submit the report you're required to submit by law.
Yes, once the information is collected, we will provide that report. It's my understanding we have, in fact, advised Congress about the $43,000 expenditure. Now, if there's additional information that's needed, we will collect that information and get it to Congress.
There is additional information needed because the GAO found you violated the law. And if
Well, that the
they
agency
find you
violated-
violated the law, you are required to make a report to the President and to the Congress. You have not done so. And then all additional expenditures after that are also required to be reported, and we haven't had a report on that either. Let me ask about this behavior with the sirens around town. You know, we've heard of your protective detail. Eric Weiss told the New York Times that when traveling, you wanted to use lights and sirens, which are supposed to be reserved for emergencies, because you often ran late. And he said that 2 weeks after he protested and tried to stop the practice, he was removed from his position. Let's get the record straight. Did your security detail use sirens while you were in the car for non-emergencies? Yes or no?
And let's do this.
Yes or no?
There are policies in place that governs the use of lights. Those policies were followed, to the best of my knowledge, by each of the agents that served me.
Okay, here we go. There have been reports that you encouraged the use of lights and sirens on your motorcade, even though there wasn't an emergency. Is that true?
I don't recall that happening, Ranking Member Udall.
You went
And
shopping?
there are policies,
You
there are
also-
policies that the agency follows, the agents follow, and to my knowledge, they followed it in all instances.
Well, and you personally requested that the sirens and the flashing lights occur, is that right?
I think I've just indicated that the agency has followed those policies to the best of my knowledge. And that's
You
what,
personally requested that on a number of trips.
no, I don't recall that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to submit for the record, Madam Chair, an email that was released this morning by your Pasquale Paretta. He sent an email and he says, by the way, Administrator Pruitt encourages the use. So I'd like to submit that for the record.
That will be included as part of the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Administrator, Senator Van Hollen asked the question, and he didn't get a yes or no answer, and that's all I'm asking for here. Did you personally, on your first day, ask for 24/7 protection for yourself?
Personally, on the first day, the 24/7 had been determined by the Criminal Enforcement Office to provide. So I did not.
You did not
I did not
personally
direct that.
request it.
I didn't
Well,
direct that on the first day.
So your answer is no.
My answer is I did not direct that on the first day.
Okay, well,
yeah.
all the documents dispute that, so.
Senator, if I may, I mean, if I,
No, there's just the documents dispute that. Here, and this is a statement, not a question. But my understanding from the reporting on this is that you have never had a security assessment to determine whether 24/7 was required. And that's been reported yesterday in the Washington Post. Now, when we sat in this room together in June of last year, I asked you to confirm that you would respond to all questions, including written correspondence, from both majority and minority members of this subcommittee as quickly as possible. And your answer was, quote, yes, without question. Does that commitment still stand?
yes.
Now, why then have you still not answered my April 4th letter and my May 9th follow-up letter requesting information related to your condo rental here in D.C.?
I'll check.
Will you
But I want
respond to
to-
my two letters?
Senator, I really want to read specifically
Office
from the
arrangement.
section that you made reference to a minute ago, because it's important that there's clarity around this issue on 24/7. The OIG in the letter to
We
to
have
the
all the
Senate, I understand,
documents,
but it's
sir.
important.
We have all
it's
the
important that
documents. I
that
didn't-
said, the Office of Criminal Enforcement began providing 24/7 coverage, and the decision was made by the Office of Criminal
I
Enforcement. That was done
understand
prior to
that.
my arrival.
I
at the
understand that.
EPA.
I have limited time. We'll put all the documents in the record, and you can make your arguments.
We will
to
include
yeah.
the documents
All
that you
the
are seeking to
documents.
read, Administrator, in
Senator
the
Van
record.
Hollen has all the documents. We'll put them all into the record. I have several of them right here. And we thank you, Madam Chair, for that. On this condo, I want to ask you, are you going to respond to my letters? Do you see a conflict of interest in accepting a pretty good housing deal from a lobbyist couple that has business before the EPA?
Senator, the ethics officials at the agency actually have performed 2 ethics reviews saying that the lease terms are consistent with comparable rates in the marketplace.
was all done
now
after
at the
the
time,
fact.
it was. But Steve Hart is someone that was not registered as a lobbyist in 2017. He's a longtime
no.
associate and friend.
Okay, well, let's just stop
but
there.
more-
Steve Hart was not registered as a lobbyist. Here's his firm. Email, answered a question. Williams and Jensen told The Hill in an email, quote, an independent review of the firm's lobbying activity in advance of the quarterly filing deadline concluded that Mr. Hart had lobbying contact with the Environmental Protection Agency in the first quarter of 2018, period, end quote.
In the period in question.
Do you think that's acceptable to have this individual, Mr. Hart, who's a lobbyist, and then you rent a room from him at a pretty good deal? Yes or no?
The
It's a
filing
simple
that you're
question.
referring to was for the first quarter of 2018, and it was for the firm, and Mr. Hart was not listed on that disclosure.
Well, Mr. Hart was a lobbyist, and you rented a room from him, and you had issues pending before your agency at the time that Hart's firm were working on, which is, to me, that is the exact swamp that President Trump was trying to get rid of. And all of these questions I've been asking about is this swampy behavior that's going on here. I mean, consistently, over and over and over again, whether it's sirens, whether it's, perks for you and your friends, for your staff. Let me move here to it's been reported that a member of your staff, one who got a 33% raise to over $114,000 earlier this year, house hunted for you during work hours. This would be a violation of federal rules as well as a misuse of taxpayer dollars. Did your staff contact realtors and arrange tours for you during working hours? Yes or no?
It's
a
my
simple
understanding that
question.
all activity there was on
Yes or
personal
no,
time.
sir? Yes
As I
or no?
indicated, it's my understanding that all activity there was on personal time. And the individual that you're referring to is a longtime friend of my wife and myself.
So
And
did you-
to link
did
any
you
type
pay-
of review
did you-
on a pay increase is just simply not substantiated.
Well,
It's just not, it's not related at all.
Let me, you're an attorney general, we're an attorney general, you're a law enforcement official. CFR regulations prohibit directing a subordinate to do personal work for you, and if they volunteer, that is a gift. Services must be paid for at fair market value. So it doesn't cut it that they're a friend or that kind of thing. Did you pay them at the time for doing that
All
work?
activity that I'm aware of that was engaged in by the individual you're speaking about
Yeah.
occurred in personal time.
And did you pay them for it?
No, I did not.
Then that's a gift. That's in violation of federal law. Now, Mr. Pruitt, regarding Samantha Dravis, your former director of your Office of Policy, the Inspector General is now investigating if Ms. Dravis came to the office most or all of the months of November, December, and January. Until she resigned last month, she was your director of your Office of Policy, your top policy advisor, was she not? Yes or no?
Yeah, she was the head of policy at the EPA.
Yeah, and you don't, we up here, we try to make sure these people come to work. Were you making
We
sure
do as
she
well.
came to work for 3 months?
In fact, interacted with her multiple times through that process.
Those 3 months, November, December, and January,
Schedule
she was in work.
The schedule shows that she was attending meetings, not just with me, but others in the agency.
And she worked the whole time. That's your testimony.
No, that's not what I said, Senator.
Well,
I said I
did she-
interacted with her during that time
Yeah,
frame, and she
did
was providing other
did-
services during that
sir,
time frame as well.
During the months of November, December, and January, was she working for you?
She was employed at the agency, and there's a review of that process ongoing, and the record will bear that out.
Okay, related to the search for the apartment and housing, Mr. Administrator, and this is really a simple yes or no. Will you provide copies of all emails and other documents related to your apartment search, including any from your staff, Ms. Hupp, H-U-P-P, from her email address?
Yes.
Thank you very much. You've spoken a lot about.
With the clarification, obviously, it'd be EPA.
Could you do
email.
that within 10 days? Could
I
that
mean, it would be, emails from the agency. That's what I trust that you're asking for.
Well, I'm asking for any emails that relate to this, but yeah, emails from the agency, that's included.
Yeah, so I just wanted the clarity. In the time frame, I understand that there's significant FOIAs that we're responding to, but we will respond expeditiously, yes.
But You're willing to give us any of her emails, is that correct?
As I indicated from the agency, yes.
Yeah. And you've spoken a lot about the rule of law. I know you're familiar with a very important law called the FOIA. You just mentioned Freedom of Information. That law requires full disclosure of information and documents controlled by the U.S. government. Did EPA impose a political review process before releasing FOIA requests?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Yeah, thank you.
And wait, maybe you can define that. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by political,
Well,
what was the term?
there are only 9 exceptions to FOIA, and none of them are for political purposes.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understood your
Our
question.
understanding is that you put in a political review
As
on
far-
FOIA requests by your staff at your level.
The Office of General Counsel at the agency conducts the review process, and they follow the statute as far as what exemptions are applicable.
And they don't put any political review in it.
As I indicated, the OGC reviews it and follows the statute as far as what exemptions are applicable.
You haven't asked them to put a political review in it in addition to the 9 exceptions.
I'm not entirely sure what I can say more than what I've already said about that, Senator.
All right, earlier this month, multiple news reports indicated that your press team was shopping negative stories about Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to take attention away from your scandals. I have to imagine it would be embarrassing to President Trump to have officials at one federal agency try to publicly smear one of his cabinet secretaries. Did this actually happen? Is your staff working to undermine other cabinet officials to distract from your own negative media attention?
Absolutely not. In fact, we investigated that initially. In fact, my chief of staff called Ryan Zinke's chief of staff at this very moment that that came up, and addressed that matter, and it was determined that that was not happening.
And you'll release all emails that relate to that.
We've investigated that with the gentleman in question and spoken to Interior, and whatever documents are relevant to that are subject to disclosure, we'll provide.
Well, multiple reports indicate that the White House believes this happened. Did you ask what facts they knew to inform proper management and discipline of your staff?
I can only say to you, Senator, that upon learning of this allegation, we talked to the individual in question, and he denied that it ever took place, and I had my chief of staff call the chief of staff for Ryan Zinke and clarify and make sure that if there were any questions, they were addressed. So we took immediate actions internally.
Yeah, and since you disagree with the White House, should the IG investigate whether EPA employees are wasting their time shopping negative stories about other officials?
Again, Senator, I don't know what else I can offer to you other than what I've already said about what steps we've taken internally.
EPA has developed a list of 22 Superfund sites, some of which were talked about today, which need immediate and intense action. At least one site was proposed for listing as a new Superfund site and added to the elite group of sites at the exact same time. This just happened to be a few weeks after Hugh Hewitt, a conservative commentator who regularly defends your actions, asked you to meet with a California law firm who represents a client that wants to see that very site cleaned up faster. Yes or no, did you take interest in that particular California site after Hugh Hewitt brought it to your attention?
There were discussions around that site well before that meeting took place. And actually, good things came out of that meeting and the decision. This is, I think you're referring to the administrator's list with respect to a special emphasis. I'm not entirely sure why there would be criticism around us taking concerted action to address Superfund sites and get accountability, whomever brings that to our attention.
Yeah, well, the idea is that there's been scientific analysis and thorough analysis on a list, and so then special friends get on the list that has been created by the agency. Looks a little bit fishy to me. As I understand it, your trip to Morocco cost taxpayers nearly $100,000, but had little connection to the EPA's traditional mission or activities. It is also reported that the trip was largely organized and arranged by Richard Smoken, a Comcast lobbyist you have reportedly known for over a decade. And almost immediately after the trip, Mr. Smoken became a registered foreign agent on behalf of the Moroccan government with a $40,000 a month contract. Individuals familiar with your Morocco trip indicated that Mr. Smoken was, quote, a near constant presence during your trip. But Mr. Smoken has also been involved in other matters with the EPA during your tenure. For example, he arranged your meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, tried to plan 2 other trips to Australia to address a business council for international understanding, and dined with you on multiple occasions in 2017. Did you discuss official EPA matters with Mr. Smoken during any of your extensive interactions with him?
I'm so glad you've asked this question about Morocco, because it's one of those situations that we were on the ground for 36 hours. We have an environmental chapter.
I just asked you a very specific question.
And I feel like,
Yeah, you,
Chairman, if I could.
did you discuss, Madam Chair, he's not answering my question.
Well, you need to give him an opportunity to answer. Go ahead.
You made a lot of statements
Administrator.
there, Senator, with respect to the characterizing the Morocco trip. And the Morocco trip, there was a free trade agreement. As you know, free trade agreements have environmental chapters that are part of those. The free trade agreement was up in February of this year. We had staff preparing that environmental negotiation, that chapter. I met with 5 or 6 different individuals while in Morocco over a 36-hour period with respect to those issues. We've had staff, I've learned recently, in Morocco following up on those environmental negotiations to ensure that they remain part of the free trade agreement. So to characterize the Morocco trip as being anything other than about EPA business is just simply a mischaracterization.
Okay, now my question. Did you discuss official EPA matters with Mr. Smoken during any of your extensive interactions with him? Pretty simple.
The only discussions we've ever had have been as part of meetings in the office or on the trip that you're speaking about.
And you talked about the trade agreement. Did you work with a telecommunications, why did you work with a telecommunications lobbyist regarding such a trip as opposed to State Department, U.S. Trade Representative, or other
We
federal
did, in fact.
officials?
We worked with the U.S. Trade Representative. In fact, the ambassador for Morocco was in my office requesting that we make the trip, Senator. So the trip occurred because of the request by the ambassador, in addition to the environmental chapter that was being negotiated as part of the free trade agreement. And the U.S. Trade Representative's office was, in fact, engaged in the process, both before, during, and after.
Will you commit to providing this committee and others in Congress all documents related to your trip, Mr. Smoken, and the free trade agreement with Morocco?
Absolutely.
Within 10 business days? Thank you. Absolutely, right?
The 10 days I can't speak to. I mean, but we will actually absolutely provide the documentation.
Okay. Administrator Pruitt, you mentioned methylene chloride and meeting with the families. When are we going to see the ban? That's what I want to know.
Well, as you know-
That's what the families want to know. I met with some of the same families.
Yeah, as you know, Senator, the proposed ban withdrawal was submitted in January of 2017.
That's right. The
And-
last
and-
administration said ban.
That's right.
Ban.
And then there were comments taken, and that's been pending at the agency since probably June of this year as far as review of those comments. And when I met with those families recently, my commitment post was to forward the proposed rule as it currently stands, as was submitted in January of 17, to OMB to move to finalization of that rule. Now, there are some steps that need to be addressed. There's a DOD issue with respect to the use of methylene chloride and then contractors of DODs. There's some clarity that needs to be addressed. But and as you know, the rule simply says that if you distribute methylene chloride as part of for paint stripping, that it has to be in a 55-gallon drum. So there are 2 different sections of the rule, but we have forwarded that to OMB for processing and to move toward final with the clarification around the DOD issue along with contractors.
You're pushing for a ban, correct?
I'm pushing for the
Just
rule
like
that was
past
submitted.
administration.
I'm pushing for the rule that was submitted in January of 2017.
Yeah.
And that's a very important, I mean, Senator, I think that this is one of the solvents that made up the list of 10 under TSCA, the priorities that we are reviewing. And this is a matter that we needed to act on, in my view, sooner than what we did. And I appreciate you and others bringing that to my attention. And the meeting that I had with those families helped cement the process that we're taking.
Now, you've mentioned several times in the course of questioning here about this new office called the Office of Continuing Improvement.
Yes, sir.
The committee was not notified of this new office. Can you commit to us again today that you will heed this committee's direction on all reorganizations, closures, and staffing changes.
Yes, but this was not a reorganization. These were employees that were already internal to the administrator's office that simply are providing leadership with respect to this Office of Continuous Improvement. So that was not a reorganization.
Well, my understanding is that kind of activity is considered, creating a new office is considered a reorganization. So can you commit to us again that you will heed this committee's direction on all reorganizations, closures, and staffing changes?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Thank you.
May I add something there? There's been a lot of discussion with respect to regions across the country about their status, and then labs as well. There's been discussions about that. One of the things that the regional labs, the previous administration began a process to eliminate many regional labs across the country. I have reversed that. So because those regional labs make a substantial difference to states in the development of state implementation plans for air quality, water quality standards that they're developing. And so when we talk about reorganization, that is very important, and we seek to make you aware of that. But we're trying to get accountability in these areas as much as anything.
And shifting very quickly here to chlorpyrifos and agriculture worker protection. Children and farm workers continue to be exposed to chlorpyrifos and other dangerous pesticides. Do you know how many children under the age of 18 work in agriculture in the U.S.?
Do I know the number?
Yeah.
I do not know the number.
Yeah, it's estimated about 500,000 children work in agriculture. And right now, you're rewriting a rule that protects those children from pesticide exposure. Time and again, we see public health and safety precautions taking a back seat while corporate friends and donors get special attention. Do you think it was appropriate to include supportive statements from Dow Chemical, the maker of chlorpyrifos, in your EPA Year in Review 2017-2018 document right under the subheading Chemicals and Pesticides?
Well, Senator, I would rather speak to the issue around age and the worker protection standard. And I want you to know that as we're evaluating that, states have requirements across many states. I think there are 30-plus states that have age requirements. And so we are contemplating and considering, should there be more deference given to those states if they set it at 16 or 18? And so the worker protection standard age requirements are important, but we're trying to figure out the best way to achieve that to give reliance upon the states and what they've already put into place. As far as the Dow reference chemical, I mean, that the Public Affairs Office put that together, and why they included that, I can inquire, but I can just provide information to you on why that was included.
Well, the additional point is, how many supportive statements do you have from agricultural workers or health professionals in the record on that issue?
Well, as you know, any changes we make to the worker protection standard, there's a comment period where there will be a variety of comments made by stakeholders, both pro and con, to lowering that or increasing that, deferring to the states or not. It's not just the age requirement issue either. It's the representation issue that we're addressing, and it's not. So there are multiple issues that we're speaking to there.
Yeah, and you have represented during your testimony today a number of times that you would answer our questions, answer our letters. We hope that you'll do that on a timely basis. Thank you, Madam Chair.